Chapter 26 of Far from the Madding Crowd. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg Hynes. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 26. Seen on the verge of the haymead. "Ah, Miss Everdene," said the sergeant, touching his diminutive cap. "Little did I think it was you I was speaking to the other night, and yet, if I had reflected, the Queen of the Corn Market, truth is truth at any hour of day or night, and I heard you so named in Casterbridge yesterday, the Queen of the Corn Market, I say, could be no other woman. I step across now to beg your forgiveness 1,000 times for having been led by my feelings to express myself too strongly for a stranger. To be sure, I am no stranger to the place. I am Sgt.Troy, as I told you, and I have assisted your uncle in these fields no end of times when I was a lad. I have been doing the same for you to-day." "I suppose I must thank you for that, Sgt.Troy," said the Queen of the Corn Market in an indifferently grateful tone. The sergeant looked hurt and sad. "Indeed you must not, Miss Everdene," he said. "Why could you think such a thing necessary?" "I am glad it is not." "Why, if I may ask without offence?" "Because I don't much want to thank you for anything." "I am afraid I have made a hole with my tongue that my heart will never mend. Oh, these intolerable times, that ill luck should follow a man for honestly telling a woman she is beautiful. 'Twas the most I said, you must own that, and the least I could say. That I own myself. There is some talk I could do without more easily than money." "Indeed, that remark is a sort of digression." "No, it means that I would rather have your room than your company." "And I would rather have curses from you than kisses from any other woman, so I'll stay here." Bathsheba was absolutely speechless, and yet she could not help feeling that the assistance he was rendering forbade a harsh repulse. "Well," continued Troy, "I suppose there is a praise which is rudeness, and that may be mine. At the same time, there is a treatment which is injustice, and that may be yours, because a plain, blunt man, who has never been taught concealment, speaks out his mind without exactly intending it, he is snapped off like the son of a sinner." "Indeed, there is no such case between us," she said, turning away. "I don't allow strangers to be bold and impudent, even in praise of me." "Ah, it is not the fact but the method which offends you," he said carelessly. "But I have the sad satisfaction of knowing that my words, whether pleasing or offensive, are unmistakably true. Would you have had me look at you and tell my acquaintance that you are quite a commonplace woman, to save you the embarrassment of being stared at if they come near you? Not I. I couldn't tell any such ridiculous lie about a beauty to encourage a single woman in England in too excessive a modesty." "It is all pretence, what you are saying," exclaimed Bathsheba, laughing in spite of herself at the sly method. "You are a rare invention, Sgt.Troy. Why couldn't you have passed by me that night and said nothing? That was all I meant to reproach you for." "Because I wasn't going to. Half the pleasure of a feeling lies in being able to express it on the spur of the moment, and I let out mine. It would have been just the same if you had been the reversed person, ugly and old. I should have exclaimed about it in the same way." "How long is it since you have been so afflicted with strong feeling, then?" "Oh, ever since I was big enough to know loveliness from deformity." "'Tis to be hoped your sense of the difference you speak of doesn't stop at faces, but extends to morals as well." "I won't speak of morals or religion, my own or anybody else's, though perhaps I should have been a very good Christian if you pretty women hadn't made me an idolater." Bathsheba moved on to hide the irrepressible dimplings of merriment. Troy followed, whirling his crop. "But, Miss Everdene, do you forgive me?" "Hardly." "Why?" "You say such things." "I said you were beautiful, and I'll say so still. For by— So you are, the most beautiful ever I saw, or may I fall dead this instant. Why, upon my—" "Don't, I won't listen to you. You are so profane," she said in a restless state between distress at hearing him and a penchant to hear more. "I say again you are a most fascinating woman. There's nothing remarkable in my saying so, is there? I'm sure the fact is evident enough. Miss Everdene, My opinion may be too forcibly let out to please you, and, for the matter of that, too insignificant to convince you. But surely it is honest. Why can't it be excused?" "Because it isn't a correct one," she femininely murmured. "Oh, fie, fie! Am I any worse for breaking the third of that terrible 10 than you are for breaking the ninth?" "Well, it doesn't seem quite true to me that I am fascinating," she replied evasively. "Not so to you? Then I say with all respect that, if so, it is owing to your modesty, Miss Everdene. But surely you must have been told by everybody of what everybody notices, and you should take their words for it." "They don't say so exactly." "Oh yes, they must." "Well, I mean to my face, as you do," she went on, allowing herself to be further lured into a conversation that intention had rigorously forbidden. "But you know they think so." "No. That is, I certainly have heard Liddy say they do, but—" She paused. Capitulation. It was the purport of the simple reply. Guarded as it was, capitulation unknown to herself. Never did a fragile, tailless sentence convey a more perfect meaning. The careless sergeant smiled within himself, and probably too the devil smiled from a loophole in Tophet. For the moment was the turning point of a career. Her tone and mien signified beyond mistake that the seed which was to lift the foundation had taken root in the chink. The remainder was a mere question of time and natural changes. "There, the truth comes out," said the soldier in reply. "Never tell me that a young lady can live in a buzz of admiration without knowing something about it. Ah, well, Miss Everdene, you are, pardon my blunt way, you are rather an injury to your race than otherwise." "How, indeed?" she said, opening her eyes. "Oh, it is true enough. I may as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. An old country saying, not of much account, but it will do for a rough soldier. And so I will speak my mind, regardless of your pleasure, and without hoping or intending to get your pardon. Why, Miss Everdene, it is in this manner that your good looks may do more harm than good in the world." The sergeant looked down the mead in critical abstraction. "Probably some one man, on an average, falls in love with each ordinary woman. She can marry him. He is content and leads a useful life. Such women as you 100 men always covet. Your eyes will bewitch scores on scores into an unavailing fancy for you. You can only marry one of that many. Out of these, say 20 will endeavour to drown the bitterness of despised love in drink. 20 more will mope away their lives without a wish or attempt to make a mark in the world, because they have no ambition apart from their attachment to you. 20 more, the susceptible person, myself possibly among them, will be always draggling after you, getting where they may just see you, and doing desperate things. Men are such constant fools. The rest may try to get over their passions with more or less success, but all these men will be saddened. And not only these 99 men, but the 99 women they may have married are saddened with them. There's my tale. That's why I say that a woman so charming as yourself, Miss Everdene, is hardly a blessing to her race." The handsome sergeant's features were during this speech as rigid and stern as John Knox's in addressing his gay young queen. Seeing she made no reply, he said, "Do you read French?" "No. I began, but when I got to the verbs my father died," she said simply. "I do when I have an opportunity, which latterly has not been often. My mother was a Parisienne. There is a proverb they have, Qui aime bien, châtie bien. He chastens who loves well. Do you understand me?" "Ah," she replied, and there was even a little tremulousness in the usually cool girl's voice. "If you can only fight half as winningly as you can talk, you are able to make a pleasure of a bayonet wound." And then poor Bathsheba instantly perceived her slip in making this admission. In hastily trying to retrieve it she went from bad to worse. "Don't, however, suppose that I derive any pleasure from what you tell me." "I know you do not. I know it perfectly," said Troy with much hearty conviction on the exterior of his face, and altering the expression to moodiness. "When a dozen men are ready to speak tenderly to you, and give you the admiration you deserve without adding the warning you need, It stands to reason that my poor rough and ready mixture of praise and blame cannot convey much pleasure. Fool as I may be, I am not so conceited as to suppose that." "I think you are conceited, nevertheless," said Bathsheba, looking askance at a reed she was fitfully pulling with one hand, having lately grown feverish under the soldier's system of procedure, not because the nature of his cajolery was entirely unperceived, but because its vigour was overwhelming. "I would not own it to anybody else, nor do I exactly to you. Still, there might have been some self-conceit in my foolish supposition the other night. I knew that what I said in admiration might be an opinion too often forced upon you to give any pleasure, but I certainly did think that the kindness of your nature might prevent you judging an uncontrolled tongue harshly, which you have done, and thinking badly of me and wounding me this morning when I am working hard to save your hay." "Well, you need not think more of that. Perhaps you did not mean to be rude to me by speaking out your mind. Indeed, I believe you did not," said the shrewd woman, in painfully innocent earnest. "And I thank you for giving help here. But mind you don't speak to me again in that way, or in any other, unless I speak to you." "Oh, Miss Bathsheba, that is too hard." "No, it isn't. Why is it?" "You will never speak to me, for I shall not be here long. I am soon going back again to the miserable monotony of drill, and perhaps our regiment will be ordered out soon. And yet you take away the one little ewe lamb of pleasure that I have in this dull life of mine. Well, perhaps generosity is not a woman's most marked characteristic." "When are you going from here?" she asked, with some interest. "In a month." "But how can it give you pleasure to speak to me?" "Can you ask, Miss Everdene, knowing as you do what my offence is based on?" "If you do care so much for a silly trifle of that kind, then I don't mind doing it," she uncertainly and doubtingly answered. "But you can't really care for a word from me. You only say so. I think you only say so." "That's unjust, but I won't repeat the remark. I am too gratified to get such a mark of your friendship at any price to cavil at the tone. I do, Miss Everdene, care for it. You may think a man foolish to want a mere word, just a good morning. Perhaps he is, I don't know. But you have never been a man looking upon a woman, and that woman yourself." "Well?" "Then you know nothing of what such an experience is like, and heaven forbid that you ever should." "Nonsense, flatterer. What is it like? I am interested in knowing." "Put shortly, it is not being able to think, hear, or look in any direction except one without wretchedness, nor there without torture." "Ah, Sergeant, it won't do. You are pretending," she said, shaking her head. "Your words are too dashing to be true." "I am not, upon the honour of a soldier." "But why is it so? Of course I ask for mere pastime." "Because you are so distracting, and I am so distracted." "You look like it." "I am indeed." "Why, you only saw me the other night." "That makes no difference. The lightning works instantaneously. I loved you then, at once, as I do now." Bathsheba surveyed him curiously, from the feet upwards, and as high as she liked to venture her glance, which was not quite so high as his eyes. "You cannot, and you don't," she said demurely. "There is no such sudden feeling in people. I won't listen to you any longer. Hear me. I wish to know what o'clock it is. I am going. I have wasted too much time here already." The sergeant looked at his watch and told her. "What, haven't you a watch, miss?" he inquired. "I have not just at present. I am about to get a new one." "No, you shall be given one. Yes, you shall. A gift, Miss Everdene, a gift." And before she knew what the young man was intending, a heavy gold watch was in her hand. "It is an unusually good one for a man like me to possess," he quietly said. "That watch has a history. Press the spring and open the back." She did so. "What do you see?" "A crest and a motto." "A coronet with 5 points, and beneath, Credit amor rebus. Love yields to circumstance. It's the motto of the Earls of Severn. That watch belonged to the last lord. It was given to my mother's husband, a medical man, for his use till I came of age, when it was to be given to me. It was all the fortune that I ever inherited. That watch has regulated imperial interests in its time, the stately ceremonial, the courtly assignation, pompous travels, and lordly sleeps. Now it is yours." "But, Sergeant Troy, I cannot take this. I cannot!" she exclaimed with round-eyed wonder. "A gold watch! What are you doing? Don't be such a dissembler." The sergeant retreated to avoid receiving back his gift, which she held out persistently towards him. Bathsheba followed as he retired. "Keep it, do, Miss Everdene, keep it," said the erratic child of impulse. "The fact of your possessing it makes it worth 10 times as much to me. A more plebeian one will answer my purpose just as well, and the pleasure of knowing whose heart my old one beats against—well, I won't speak of that. It is in far worthier hands than ever it has been in before." "But indeed I can't have it," she said in a perfect simmer of distress. "Oh, how can you do such a thing? That is, if you really mean it. Give me your dead father's watch, and such a valuable one. You should not be so reckless, indeed, Sergeant Troy." "I loved my father. Good. But better, I love you more. That is how I can do it," said the sergeant, with an intonation of such exquisite fidelity to nature that it was evidently not all acted now. Her beauty, which, whilst it had been quiescent, he had praised in jest, had in its animated phases moved him to earnest, and though his seriousness was less than she imagined, it was probably more than he imagined himself. Bathsheba was brimming with agitated bewilderment, and she said in half-suspicious accents of feeling, "Can it be? Oh, how can it be that you care for me, and so suddenly? You have seen so little of me. I may not really be so nice-looking as I seem to you. Please, do take it. Oh, do! I cannot and will not have it. Believe me, your generosity is too great. I have never done you a single kindness, and why should you be so kind to me?" A factitious reply had been again upon his lips, but it was again suspended, and he looked at her with an arrested eye. The truth was, that as she now stood, excited, wild, and honest as the day, her alluring beauty bore out so fully the epithets he had bestowed upon it, that he was quite startled at his temerity in advancing them as false. He said mechanically, "Ah, why?" and continued to look at her. "And my work folks see me following you about the field, and are wondering. Oh, this is dreadful!" she went on, unconscious of the transmutation she was effacing. "I did not quite mean you to accept it at first, for it was my one poor patent of nobility," he broke out bluntly. "But upon my soul I wish you would now. Without any shamming, come. Don't deny me the happiness of wearing it for my sake. But you are too lovely even to care to be kind as others are." "No, no, don't say so. I have reasons for reserve, which I cannot explain." "Let it be, then, let it be," he said, receiving back the watch at last. "I must be leaving you now. And will you speak to me for these few weeks of my stay?" "I will indeed, yet I don't know if I will. Oh, why did you come and disturb me so?" "Perhaps in setting a gin I have caught myself. Such things have happened. Well, will you let me work in your fields?" he coaxed. "Yes, I suppose so, if it is any pleasure to you." "Miss Everdene, I thank you." "No, no." "Good-bye." The sergeant brought his hand to the cap on the slope of his head, saluted, and returned to the distant group of haymakers. Bathsheba could not face the haymakers now. Her heart erratically flitting hither and thither from perplexed excitement, hot and almost tearful, she retreated homeward, murmuring, "Oh, what have I done? What does it mean? I wish I knew how much of it was true." End of chapter 26. Of Far from the Madding Crowd. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg Hynes. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 27. Hiving the Bees. The Weatherbury bees were late in their swarming this year. It was in the latter part of June, and the day after the interview with Troy in the hayfield, that Bathsheba was standing in her garden, watching a swarm in the air and guessing their probable settling place. Not only were they late this year, but unruly. Sometimes, throughout a whole season, all the swarms would alight on the lowest attainable bough, such as part of a currant bush or a espalier apple tree. Next year they would, with just the same unanimity, make straight off to the uppermost member of some tall, gaunt costard or quarrenden, and there defy all invaders who did not come armed with ladders and staves to take them. This was the case at present. Bathsheba's eyes, shaded by one hand, were following the ascending multitude against the unexplorable stretch of blue till they ultimately halted by one of the unwieldy trees spoken of. A process somewhat analogous to that of alleged formations of the universe time and times ago was observable. The bustling swarm had swept the sky in a scattered and uniform haze, which now thickened to a nebulous centre. This glided to a bough and grew still denser, till it formed a solid black spot upon the light. The men and women being all busily engaged in saving the hay, even Liddy had left the house for the purpose of lending a hand, Bathsheba resolved to hive the bees herself, if possible. She had dressed the hive with herbs and honey, fetched a ladder, brush, and crook, made herself impregnable with armour of leather gloves, straw hat, and large gauze veil, once green but now faded to snuff colour, and ascended a dozen rungs of the ladder. At once she heard, not 10 yards off, a voice that was beginning to have a strange power in agitating her. "Miss Everdene, let me assist you. You should not attempt such a thing alone." Troy was just opening the garden gate. Bathsheba flung down the brush, crook, and empty hive, pulled the skirt of her dress tightly round her ankles in a tremendous flurry, and, as well as she could, slid down the ladder. By the time she reached the bottom, Troy was also there, and he stooped to pick up the hive. "How fortunate I am to have dropped in at this moment!" exclaimed the sergeant. She found her voice in a minute. "What, and will you shake them in for me?" she asked, in what for a defiant girl was a faltering way, though for a timid girl it would have seemed a brave way enough. "Will I?" said Troy. "Why, of course I will. How blooming you are to-day!" Troy flung down his cane and put his foot on the ladder to ascend. "But you must have on the veil and gloves, or you'll be stung fearfully." "Ah, yes, I must put on the veil and gloves. Will you kindly show me how to fix them properly?" "And you must have the broad-brimmed hat, too, for your cap has no brim to keep the veil off, and they'll reach your face." "The broad-brimmed hat, too, by all means." So a whimsical fate ordered that her hat should be taken off, veil and all attached, and placed upon his head, Troy tossing his own into a gooseberry bush. Then the veil had to be tied at its lower edge round his collar, and the gloves put on him. He looked such an extraordinary object in this guise that, flurried as she was, she could not avoid laughing outright. It was the removal of yet another stake from the palisade of cold manners which had kept him off. Bathsheba looked on from the ground whilst he was busy sweeping and shaking the bees from the tree, holding up the hive with the other hand for them to fall into. She made use of an unobserved minute whilst his attention was absorbed in the operation to arrange her plumes a little. He came down, holding the hive at arm's length, behind which trailed a cloud of bees. "Upon my life," said Troy through the veil, "holding up this hive makes one's arm ache worse than a week of sword exercise." When the manoeuvre was complete, he approached her. "Would you be good enough to untie me and let me out? I am nearly stifled inside this silk cage." To hide her embarrassment during the unwonted process of untying the string about his neck, she said, "I have never seen that you spoke of." "What?" "The sword exercise." "Ah, would you like to?" said Troy. Bathsheba hesitated. She had heard wondrous reports from time to time by dwellers in Weatherbury, who had by chance sojourned a while in Casterbridge, near the barracks, of this strange and glorious performance, the sword exercise. Men and boys who had peeped through chinks or over walls into the barrack yard returned with accounts of it being the most flashing affair conceivable, accoutrements and weapons glistening like stars, here, there, around, yet all by rule and compass. So she said mildly what she felt strongly. "Yes, I should like to see it very much." "And so you shall. You shall see me go through it." "No. How?" "Let me consider." "Not with a walking stick. I don't care to see that. It must be a real sword." "Yes, I know. And I have no sword here. But I think I could get one by the evening. Now, will you do this?" Troy bent over her and murmured some suggestion in a low voice. "Oh, no, indeed," said Bathsheba, blushing. "Thank you very much, but I couldn't on any account." "Surely you might. Nobody would know." She shook her head, but with a weakened negation. "If I were to," she said, "I must bring Liddy too, might I not?" Troy looked far away. "I don't see why you want to bring her," he said coldly. An unconscious look of assent in Bathsheba's eyes betrayed that something more than his coldness had made her also feel that Liddy would be superfluous in the suggested scene. She had felt it even whilst making the proposal. "Well, I won't bring Liddy, and I'll come. But only for a very short time," she added. "A very short time." "It will not take 5 minutes," said Troy. End of chapter 27. Of Far from the Madding Crowd. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg Hynes. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 28. The Hollow Amid the Ferns. The hill opposite Bathsheba's dwelling extended, a mile off, into an uncultivated tract of land, dotted at this season with tall thickets of brake fern, plump and diaphanous from recent rapid growth, and radiant in hues of clear and untainted green. At 8 o'clock this midsummer evening, whilst the bristling ball of gold in the west still swept the tips of the ferns with its long luxuriant rays, a soft brushing by of garments might have been heard among them, and Bathsheba appeared in their midst, their soft feathery arms caressing her up to her shoulders. She paused, turned, and went back over the hill and half-way to her own door, when she cast a farewell glance upon the spot she had just left, having resolved not to remain near the place after all. She saw a dim spot of artificial red moving round the shoulder of the rise. It disappeared on the other side. She waited 1 minute, 2 minutes, thought of Troy's disappointment at her non-fulfilment of a promised engagement, till she again ran along the field, clambered over the bank, and followed the original direction. She was now literally trembling and panting at this, her temerity in such an errant undertaking. Her breath came and went quickly. Her eyes shone with an infrequent light. Yet go she must. She reached the verge of a pit in the middle of the ferns. Troy stood in the bottom, looking up towards her. "I heard you rustling through the fern before I saw you," he said, coming up and giving her his hand to help her down the slope. The pit was a saucer-shaped concave, naturally formed, with a top diameter of about 30 feet, and shallow enough to allow the sunshine to reach their heads. Standing in the centre, the sky overhead was met by a circular horizon of fern. This grew nearly to the bottom of the slope, and then abruptly ceased. The middle, within the belt of verdure, was floored with a thick flossy carpet of moss and grass intermingled, so yielding that the foot was half buried within it. "Now," said Troy, producing the sword, which, as he raised it into the sunlight, gleamed a sort of greeting, like a living thing. "First, we have 4 right and 4 left cuts, 4 right and 4 left thrusts. Infantry cuts and guards are more interesting than ours, to my mind, but they are not so swashing. They have 7 cuts and 3 thrusts. So much as a preliminary. Well, next, our cut 1 is as if you were sowing corn, so." Bathsheba saw a sort of rainbow upside down in the air, and Troy's arm was still again. "Cut 2, as if you were hedging, so. 3, as if you were reaping, so. 4 as if you were threshing, in that way. Then the same on the left. The thrusts are these: 1, 2, 3, 4, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, left. He repeated them. "Have 'em again," he said. 1, 2—" She hurriedly interrupted. "I'd rather not, though I don't mind your 2s and 4s, but your 1s and 3s are terrible." "Very well, I'll let you off the 1s and 3s. Next, cuts, points, and guards all together. Troy duly exhibited them. Then there's pursuing practice in this way." He gave the movements as before. "There, those are the stereotyped forms. The infantry have 2 most diabolical upward cuts, which we are too humane to use. Like this: 3, 4. "Oh, how murderous and bloodthirsty!" "They are rather deathy. Now I'll be more interesting and let you see some loose play, giving all the cuts and points, infantry and cavalry, quicker than lightning, and as promiscuously, with just enough rule to regulate instinct, and yet not to fetter it. You are my antagonist, with this difference from real warfare, that I shall miss you every time by 1 hair's breadth, or perhaps 2. Mind you don't flinch, whatever you do." "I'll be sure not to," she said invincibly. He pointed to about a yard in front of him. Bathsheba's adventurous spirit was beginning to find some grains of relish in these highly novel proceedings. She took up her position as directed, facing Troy. "Now, just to learn whether you have pluck enough to let me do what I wish, I'll give you a preliminary test." He flourished the sword by way of introduction number 2, and the next thing of which she was conscious was that the point and blade of the sword were darting with a gleam towards her left side, just above her hip, then of their reappearance on her right side, emerging as it were from between her ribs, having apparently passed through her body. The third item of consciousness was that of seeing the same sword, perfectly clean and free from blood, held vertically in Troy's hand, in the position technically called recover swords. All was as quick as electricity. "Oh!" she cried out in a fright, pressing her hand to her side. "Have you run me through?" "No, you have not. Whatever have you done?" "I have not touched you," said Troy quietly. "It was mere sleight of hand. The sword passed behind you. Now you are not afraid, are you? Because if you are, I can't perform. I give my word that I will not only not hurt you, but not once touch you." "I don't think I am afraid. You are quite sure you will not hurt me?" "Quite sure." "Is the sword very sharp?" "Oh, no. Only stand still as a statue. Now." In an instant the atmosphere was transformed to Bathsheba's eyes. Beams of light caught from the low sun's rays, above, around, in front of her, well nigh shut out earth and heaven, all emitted in the marvellous evolution of Troy's reflecting blade, which seemed everywhere at once, and yet nowhere specially. These circling gleams were accompanied by a keen rush that was almost a whistling, also springing from all sides of her at once. In short, she was enclosed in a firmament of light, and of sharp hisses, resembling a sky full of meteors close at hand. Never since the broadsword became the national weapon had there been more dexterity shown in its management than by the hands of Sgt.Troy, and never had he been in such splendid temper for the performance as now in the evening sunshine among the ferns with Bathsheba. It may safely be asserted with respect to the closeness of his cuts that, had it been possible for the edge of the sword to leave in the air a permanent substance wherever it flew past, the space left untouched would have been almost a mould of Bathsheba's figure. Behind the luminous streams of this aurora militaris she could see the hue of Troy's sword-arm, spread in a scarlet haze over the space covered by its motions, like a twanged harp-string, and behind all Troy himself, mostly facing her, sometimes to show the rear cuts half turned away, his eye nevertheless always keenly measuring her breadth and outline, and his lips tightly closed in sustained effort. Next his movements lapsed slower, and she could see them individually. The hissing of the sword had ceased, and he stopped entirely. "That outer loose lock of hair wants tidying," he said, before she had moved or spoken. "Wait, I'll do it for you." An arc of silver shone on her right side. The sword had descended. The lock dropped to the ground. "Bravely borne," said Troy. "You didn't flinch a shade's thickness. Wonderful in a woman." "It was because I didn't expect it. Oh, you have spoilt my hair." "Only once more." "No, no, I am afraid of you. Indeed I am," she cried. "I won't touch you at all, not even your hair. I am only going to kill that caterpillar settling on you. Now, still." It appeared that a caterpillar had come from the fern and chosen the front of her bodice as a resting place. She saw the point glisten towards her bosom, and seemingly enter it. Bathsheba closed her eyes in the full persuasion that she was killed at last. However, feeling just as usual, she opened them again. "There it is, look," said the sergeant, holding his sword before her eyes. The caterpillar was spitted upon its point. "Why, it is magic!" said Bathsheba, amazed. "No, no, dexterity. I merely gave point to your bosom where the caterpillar was, and instead of running you through, checked the extension 1/1000 of an inch short of your surface." "But how could you chop off a curl of my hair with a sword that has no edge?" "No edge. This sword will shave like a razor. Look here." He touched the palm of his hand with the blade, and then, lifting it, showed her a thin shaving of scarf skin dangling therefrom. "But you said before beginning that it was blunt and couldn't cut me." "That was to get you to stand still, and so make sure of your safety. The risk of injuring you through your moving was too great not to force me to tell you a fib to escape it." She shuddered. "I have been within an inch of my life, and didn't know it." "More precisely speaking, you have been within half an inch of being pared alive 295 times." "Oh, cruel, cruel 'tis of you!" "You have been perfectly safe, nevertheless. My sword never errs." And Troy returned the weapon to the scabbard. Bathsheba, overcome by 100 tumultuous feelings resulting from the scene, abstractedly sat down on a tuft of heather. "I must leave you now," said Troy softly, "and I'll venture to take and keep this in remembrance of you." She saw him stoop to the grass, pick up the winding lock which he had severed from her manifold tresses, twist it round his fingers, unfasten a button in the breast of his coat, and carefully put it inside. She felt powerless to withstand or deny him. He was altogether too much for her, and Bathsheba seemed as one who, facing a reviving wind, finds it blow so strongly that it stops the breath. He drew near and said, "I must be leaving you." He drew nearer still. A minute later, and she saw his scarlet form disappear amid the ferny thicket, almost in a flash, like a brand swiftly waved. That minute's interval had brought the blood beating into her face, set her stinging as if aflame to the very hollows of her feet, and enlarged emotion to a compass which quite swamped thought. It had brought upon her a stroke resulting, as did that of Moses in Horeb, in a liquid stream, here a stream of tears. She felt like one who has sinned a great sin. The circumstance had been the gentle dip of Troy's mouth downwards upon her own. He had kissed her. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Far from the Madding Crowd. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg Hynes. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 29. Particulars of a Twilight Walk. We now see the element of folly distinctly mingling with the many varying particulars which made up the character of Bathsheba Everdene. It was almost foreign to her intrinsic nature. Introduced as lymph on the dart of Eros, it eventually permeated and coloured her whole constitution. Bathsheba, though she had too much understanding to be entirely governed by her womanliness, had too much womanliness to use her understanding to the best advantage. Perhaps in no minor point does woman astonish her helpmate more than in the strange power she possesses of believing cajoleries that she knows to be false, except, indeed, in that of being utterly sceptical on strictures that she knows to be true. Bathsheba loved Troy in the way that only self-reliant women love when they abandon their self-reliance. When a strong woman recklessly throws away her strength, she is worse than a weak woman who has never had any strength to throw away. One source of her inadequacy is the novelty of the occasion. She has never had practice in making the best of such a condition. Weakness is doubly weak by being new. Bathsheba was not conscious of guile in this matter. Although in one sense a woman of the world, it was, after all, that world of daylight coteries and green carpets wherein cattle form the passing crowd, and winds the busy hum, where a quiet family of rabbits or hares lives on the other side of your party wall, where your neighbour is everybody in the tithing, and where calculation is confined to market days. Of the fabricated tastes of good fashionable society she knew but little, and of the formulated self-indulgence of bad nothing at all. Had her utmost thoughts in this direction been distinctly worded, and by herself they never were, they would have amounted to such a matter as that she felt her impulses to be pleasanter guides than her discretion. Her love was entire as a child's, and though as warm as summer, it was fresh as spring. Her culpability lay in her making no attempt to control feeling by subtle and careful inquiry into consequences. She could show others the steep and thorny way, but recked not her own rede. And Troy's deformities lay deep down from a woman's vision, whilst his embellishments were upon the very surface, thus contrasting with homely Oak, whose defects were patent to the blindest, and whose virtues were as metals in a mine. The difference between love and respect was markedly shown in her conduct. Bathsheba had spoken of her interest in Boldwood with the greatest freedom to Liddy, but she had only communed with her own heart concerning Troy. All this infatuation Gabriel saw, and was troubled thereby from the time of his daily journey afield to the time of his return, and on to the small hours of many a night. That he was not beloved had hitherto been his great sorrow. That Bathsheba was getting into the toils was now a sorrow greater than the first, and one which nearly obscured it. It was a result which paralleled the oft-quoted observation of Hippocrates concerning physical pains. That is a noble, though perhaps an unpromising love, which not even the fear of breeding aversion in the bosom of the one beloved can deter from combating his or her errors. Oak determined to speak to his mistress. He would base his appeal on what he considered her unfair treatment of Farmer Boldwood, now absent from home. An opportunity occurred one evening when she had gone for a short walk by a path through the neighbouring cornfields. It was dusk when Oak, who had not been far afield that day, took the same path and met her returning, quite pensively as he thought. The wheat was now tall and the path was narrow. Thus the way was quite a sunken groove between the embrowning thicket on either side. Two persons could not walk abreast without damaging the crop, and Oak stood aside to let her pass. "Oh, is it Gabriel?" she said. "You are taking a walk too? Good night." "I thought I would come to meet you, as it is rather late," said Oak, turning and following at her heels when she had brushed somewhat quickly by him. "Thank you, indeed, but I am not very fearful." "Oh, no, but there are bad characters about." "I never meet them." Now Oak, with marvellous ingenuity, had been going to introduce the gallant sergeant through the channel of bad characters. But all at once the scheme broke down, it suddenly occurring to him that this was rather a clumsy way, and too barefaced to begin with. He tried another preamble. "As the man who would naturally come to meet you is away from home too, I mean Farmer Boldwood, why, thinks I'll go," said he. "Ah, yes." She walked on without turning her head, and for many steps nothing further was heard from her quarter than the rustle of her dress against the heavy corn ears. Then she resumed rather tartly, "I don't quite understand what you meant by saying that Mr. Boldwood would naturally come to meet me." "I mean on account of the wedding which they say is likely to take place between you and him, miss. Forgive my speaking plainly." "They say what is not true," she returned quickly. "No marriage is likely to take place between us." Gabriel now put forth his unobscured opinion, for the moment had come. "Well, Miss Everdene," he said, "putting aside what people say, I never in my life saw any courting, if his is not a courting of you." Bathsheba would probably have terminated the conversation there and then by flatly forbidding the subject, had not her conscious weakness of position allured her to falter and argue in endeavours to better it. "Since this subject has been mentioned," she said very emphatically, "I am glad of the opportunity of clearing up a mistake which is very common and very provoking. I didn't definitely promise Mr. Boldwood anything. I have never cared for him. I respect him, and he has urged me to marry him, but I have given him no distinct answer. As soon as he returns I shall do so, and the answer will be that I cannot think of marrying him." "People are full of mistakes, seemingly." "They are." "The other day they said you were trifling with him, and you almost proved that you were not. Lately they have said that you be not, and you straightway begin to show." "That I am, I suppose you mean?" "Well, I hope they speak the truth." "They do, but wrongly applied. I don't trifle with him, but then I have nothing to do with him." Oak was unfortunately led on to speak of Boldwood's rival in a wrong tone to her after all. "I wish you had never met that young Sgt.Troy, miss," he sighed. Bathsheba's steps became faintly spasmodic. "Why?" she asked. "He is not good enough for 'ee." "Did anyone tell you to speak to me like this?" "Nobody at all." "Then it appears to me that Sgt.Troy does not concern us here," she said intractably. "Yet I must say that Sgt.Troy is an educated man, and quite worthy of any woman. He is well born." "His being higher in learning and birth than the ruck of soldiers is anything but a proof of his worth. It shows his course to be downward." "I cannot see what this has to do with our conversation. Mr. Troy's course is not by any means downward, and his superiority is a proof of his worth." "I believe him to have no conscience at all, and I cannot help begging you, miss, to have nothing to do with him. Listen to me this once, only this once. I don't say he is such a bad man as I have fancied. I pray to God he is not. But since we don't exactly know what he is, why not behave as if he might be bad, simply for your own safety? Don't trust him, mistress. I ask you not to trust him so." "Why, pray?" "I like soldiers, but this one I do not like," he said sturdily. "His cleverness in his calling may have tempted him astray, and what is mirth to the neighbours is ruin to the woman. When he tries to talk to 'ee again, why not turn away with a short 'good day,' and when you see him coming one way, turn the other. When he says anything laughable, fail to see the point, and don't smile, and speak of him before those who will report your talk as 'that fantastical man,' or 'that Sergeant What's his name,' that a man of family that has come to the dogs. Don't be unmannerly towards him, but harmlessly uncivil, and so get rid of the man." No Christmas robin detained by a window pane ever pulsed as did Bathsheba now. I say again, that it doesn't become you to talk about him. Why he should be mentioned passes me quite," she exclaimed desperately. "I know this, that he is a thoroughly conscientious man, blunt sometimes even to rudeness, but always speaking his mind about you plain to your face." "Oh." "He is as good as anybody in this parish. He is very particular, too, about going to church. Yes, he is." "I am afeard nobody ever saw him there. I never did, certainly." "The reason of that is," she said eagerly, "that he goes in privately by the old tower door, just when the service commences, and sits at the back of the gallery. He told me so." This supreme instance of Troy's goodness fell upon Gabriel's ears like the 13th stroke of a crazy clock. It was not only received with utter incredulity as regarded itself, but threw doubt on all the assurances that had preceded it. Oak was grieved to find how entirely she trusted him. He brimmed with deep feeling as he replied in a steady voice, the steadiness of which was spoilt by the palpableness of his great effort to keep it so. "You know, mistress, that I love you, and shall love you always. I only mention this to bring to your mind that at any rate I would wish to do you no harm. Beyond that I put it aside. I have lost in the race for money and good things, and I am not such a fool as to pretend to 'ee now that I am poor, and you have got altogether above me. But Bathsheba, dear mistress, this I beg you to consider, that both to keep yourself well honoured among the work folk, and in common generosity to an honourable man who loves you as well as I, you should be more discreet in your bearings towards this soldier." "Don't!" she exclaimed in a choking voice. "Are ye not more to me than my own affairs, and even life?" he went on. "Come, listen to me. I'm 6 years older than you, and Mr. Boldwood is 10 years older than I. And consider, I do beg of 'ee to consider before it is too late, how safe you would be in his hands." Oak's allusion to his own love for her lessened, to some extent, her anger at his interference, but she could not really forgive him for letting his wish to marry her be eclipsed by his wish to do her good, any more than for his slighting treatment of Troy. "I wish you to go elsewhere," she commanded, a paleness of face invisible to the eye being suggested by the trembling words. "Do not remain on this farm any longer. I don't want you. I beg you to go." "That's nonsense," said Oak calmly. "This is the second time you've pretended to dismiss me, and what's the use of it?" "Pretended? You shall go, sir. Your lecturing I will not hear. I am mistress here." "Go, indeed. What folly will you say next? Treating me like Dick, Tom, and Harry, when you know that a short time ago my position was as good as yours. Upon my life, Bathsheba, it is too barefaced. You know, too, that I can't go without putting things in such a strait as you wouldn't get out of I can't tell when. Unless, indeed, you'll promise to have an understanding man as bailiff or manager or something. I'll go at once if you promise that." "I shall have no bailiff. I shall continue to be my own manager," she said decisively. "Very well, then, you should be thankful to me for biding. How would the farm go on with nobody to mind it but a woman? But mind this, I don't wish ye to feel you owe me anything. Not I. What I do, I do. Sometimes I say I should be as glad as a bird to leave the place, for don't suppose I am content to be a nobody. I was made for better things. However, I don't like to see your concerns going to ruin, as they must if you keep in this mind. I hate taking my own measure so plain, but upon my life your provoking ways make a man say what he wouldn't dream of at other times. I own to be rather interfering, but you know well enough how it is, and who she is that I like too well, and feel too much like a fool about to be civil to her." It is more than probable that she privately and unconsciously respected him a little for this grim fidelity, which had been shown in his tone even more than in his words. At any rate, she murmured something to the effect that he might stay if he wished. She said more distinctly, "Will you leave me alone now? I don't order it as a mistress. I ask it as a woman, and I expect you not to be so uncourteous as to refuse." "Certainly I will, Miss Everdene," said Gabriel gently. He wondered that the request should have come at this moment, for the strife was over, and they were on a most desolate hill, far from every human habitation, and the hour was getting late. He stood still and allowed her to get far ahead of him, till he could only see her form upon the sky. A distressing explanation of this anxiety to be rid of him at that point now ensued. A figure apparently rose from the earth beside her. The shape beyond all doubt was Troy's. Oak would not be even a possible listener, and at once turned back till a good 200 yards were between the lovers and himself. Gabriel went home by way of the churchyard. In passing the tower he thought of what she had said about the sergeant's virtuous habit of entering the church unperceived at the beginning of service. Believing that the little gallery door alluded to was quite disused, he ascended to the external flight of steps at the top of which it stood, and examined it. The pale lustre yet hanging in the northwestern heaven was sufficient to show that a sprig of ivy had grown from the wall across the door to a length of more than a foot, delicately tying the panel to the stone jamb. It was a decisive proof that the door had not been opened at least since Troy came back to Weatherbury. End of chapter 29. Of Far from the Madding Crowd. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg Hynes. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 30. hot cheeks and tearful eyes. Half an hour later Bathsheba entered her own house. There burnt upon her face when she met the light of the candles the flush and excitement which were a little less than chronic with her now. The farewell words of Troy, who had accompanied her to the very door, still lingered in her ears. He had bidden her adieu for 2 days, which were, so he stated, to be spent at Bath in visiting some friends. He had also kissed her a second time. It is only fair to Bathsheba to explain here a little fact which did not come to light till a long time afterwards, that Troy's presentation of himself so aptly at the roadside this evening was not by any distinctly preconcerted arrangement. He had hinted, she had forbidden, and it was only on the chance of his still coming that she had dismissed Oak, fearing a meeting between them just then. She now sank down into a chair, wild and perturbed by all these new and fevering sequences. Then she jumped up with a manner of decision, and fetched her desk from a side table. In 3 minutes, without pause or modification, she had written a letter to Boldwood, at his address beyond Casterbridge, saying mildly but firmly that she had well considered the whole subject he had brought before her, and kindly given her time to decide upon. That her final decision was that she could not marry him. She had expressed to Oak an intention to wait till Boldwood came home before communicating to him her conclusive reply, but Bathsheba found that she could not wait. It was impossible to send the letter till the next day, yet to quell her uneasiness by getting it out of her hands, and so, as it were, setting the act in motion at once, she arose to take it to any one of the women who might be in the kitchen. She paused in the passage. A dialogue was going on in the kitchen, and Bathsheba and Troy were the subject of it. "If he marry her, she'll give up farming." "'Twill be a gallant life, but may bring some trouble between the mirth, so say I." "Well, I wish I had half such a husband." Bathsheba had too much sense to mind seriously what her servitors said about her, but too much womanly redundance of speech to leave alone what was said till it had died the natural death of unminded things. She burst in upon them. "Who are you speaking of?" she asked. There was a pause before anybody replied. At last Liddy said frankly, "What was passing was a bit of a word about yourself, miss." "I thought so. Maryann and Liddy and Temperance. Now I forbid you to suppose such things. You know I don't care the least for Mr. Troy, not I. Everybody knows how much I hate him. Yes," repeated the forward young person, "hate him." "We know you do, miss," said Liddy, "and so do we all." "I hate him too," said Maryann. "Maryann! Oh, you perjured woman!" "How can you speak that wicked story?" said Bathsheba excitedly. "You admired him from your heart only this morning in the very world. You did. Yes, Maryann, you know it." "Yes, miss, but so did you. He's a wild scamp now, and you are right to hate him." "He is not a wild scamp. How dare you to my face? I have no right to hate him, nor you, nor anybody. But I am a silly woman. What is it to me what he is? You know it is nothing. I don't care for him. I don't mean to defend his good name, not I. Mind this, if any of you say a word against him, you'll be dismissed instantly." She flung down the letter and surged back into the parlour with a big heart and tearful eyes, Liddy following her. "Oh, miss," said mild Liddy, looking pitifully into Bathsheba's face, "I am sorry we mistook you. I did think you cared for him, but I see you don't now." "Shut the door, Liddy." Liddy closed the door and went on. "People always say such foolery, miss. I'll make answer henceforth. Of course a lady like Miss Everdene can't love him. I'll say it out in plain black and white." Bathsheba burst out. "Oh, Liddy, are you such a simpleton? Can't you read riddles? Can't you see? Are you a woman yourself?" Liddy's clear eyes rounded with wonderment. "Yes, you must be a blind thing, Liddy," she said in reckless abandonment and grief. "Oh, I love him to very distraction and misery and agony. Don't be frightened at me, though perhaps I am enough to frighten any innocent woman. Come closer, closer." She put her arms around Liddy's neck. "I must let it out to somebody. It is wearing me away.
Don't you yet know enough of me to see through that miserable denial of mine? O God, what a lie it was! Heaven and my love forgive me! And don't you know that a woman who loves at all thinks nothing of perjury when it is balanced against her love? There, go out of the room. I want to be quite alone." Liddy went towards the door. "Liddy, come here. Solemnly swear to me that he's not a fast man, that it is all lies they say about him." "But, miss, how can I say he is not if—" "You graceless girl! How can you have the cruel heart to repeat what they say? Unfeeling thing that you are! But I'll see if you or anybody else in the village, or town either, dare do such a thing." She started off, pacing from the fireplace to door and back again. "No, miss, I don't. I know it's not true," said Liddy, frightened at Bathsheba's unwonted vehemence. "I suppose you only agree with me like that to please me. But, Liddy, he cannot be bad, as is said. Do you hear?" "Yes, miss, yes." "And you don't believe he is?" "I don't know what to say, miss," said Liddy, beginning to cry. "If I say no, you don't believe me. If I say yes, you rage at me." "Say you don't believe it. Say you don't." "I don't believe him to be so bad as they make out." "He is not bad at all. My poor life and heart, how weak I am!" she moaned in a relaxed, desultory way, heedless of Liddy's presence. "Oh, how I wish I had never seen him! Loving is misery for women always. I shall never forgive God for making me a woman, and dearly I am beginning to pay for the honour of owning a pretty face." She freshened and turned to Liddy suddenly. "Mind this, Liddy Smallbury. If you repeat anywhere a single word of what I have said to you inside these closed doors, I'll never trust you, or love you, or have you with me a moment longer. Not a moment." "I don't want to repeat anything," said Liddy, with womanly dignity of a diminutive order. "But I don't wish to stay with you, and if you please, I'll go at the end of the harvest, or this week, or to-day. I don't see that I deserve to be put upon and stormed at for nothing," concluded the small woman, bigly. "No, no, Liddy, you must stay," said Bathsheba, dropping from haughtiness to entreaty with capricious inconsequence. "You must not notice my being in a taking just now. You are not as a servant, you are a companion to me. Dear, dear, I don't know what I am doing since this miserable ache of my heart has waited and worn upon me so. What shall I come to? I suppose I shall get further and further into troubles. I wonder sometimes if I am doomed to die in the union. I'm friendless enough, God knows." "I won't notice anything, nor will I leave you," sobbed Liddy impulsively, putting her lips to Bathsheba's and kissing her. Then Bathsheba kissed Liddy, and all was smooth again. "I don't often cry, do I, Liddy? But you have made tears come into my eyes," she said, a smile shining through the moisture. "Try to think him a good man, won't you, dear Liddy?" "I will, miss, indeed. He is a sort of steady man in a wild way, you know. That's better than to be, as some are, wild in a steady way. I'm afraid that's how I am. And promise me to keep my secret, do, Liddy, and do not let him know that I have been crying about him, because it will be dreadful for me, and no good to him, poor thing." "Death's head himself shall wring it from me, mistress, if I've a mind to keep anything, and I'll always be your friend," replied Liddy emphatically, at the same time bringing a few more tears into her own eyes, not from any particular necessity, but from an artistic sense of making herself in keeping with the remainder of the picture, which seems to influence women at such times. "I think God likes us to be good friends, don't you?" "Indeed I do." "And, dear miss, you won't harry me and storm at me, will you? Because you seem to swell as tall as a lion then, and it frightens me. Do you know, I fancy you would be a match for any man when you're in one of your takings." "Never, do you?" said Bathsheba, slightly laughing, though somewhat seriously alarmed by this Amazonian picture of herself. "I hope I am not a bold sort of maid, mannish," she continued with some anxiety. "Oh, no, not mannish, but so almighty womanish that 'tis getting on that way sometimes. Ah, miss," she said, after having drawn her breath very sadly in and sent it very sadly out, "I wish I had half your failing in that way. 'Tis a great protection to a poor maid in these illegitimate days." End of chapter 30